What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we got a good one for you guys. In today's video, we are going to be going over the top 10 running backs, giving you a lay of the land for the position. With it now being mid-July and a lot of new people coming to the channel that maybe haven't been following us throughout this entire offseason, this should serve as a solid jumping off point, giving you a high-level overview of how we feel about the running backs going early in drafts. Before we do get into the video though, just a quick shout out and reminder that if you do enjoy these videos, the best way to show your support is simply by hitting that like button. It only takes a moment for you, but greatly helps us out in growing the channel. As you may know, we are on the road to 100k subscribers and we are inching close to it. Our goal is to hit that by the start of the NFL season, and with all of your help, we can definitely make that a reality. So if you're new to the channel, maybe you haven't subscribed yet, consider taking today as an opportunity to do so. And while you're at it, if you enjoy, hit that like button and let us know. Also, guys, be advised, our draft packages are currently available now. So if you want access to our tier-based rankings, our sleepers, our targets, our busts, risk ratings, player projections, video player breakdowns on the top 150 players, access to our private Discord community group, and more, what are you waiting for? You can get that at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link, as always, in the description box below. With that being said though, it's time to hop over to our stat of the day, and yesterday's stat of the day was which running back scored the most full PPR points in a single playoff game this season. The correct answer was actually Cam Akers, coming in with 25.6 points. Congratulations to Hoddard, who is the first to get this right both on YouTube and Twitter. So once again, massive shout out to you, but let's see who can get today's question correct. In 2020, just 3 quarterbacks had at least 450 passing yards in a single game last season. There was one quarterback in the league though who was able to do this on 3 separate occasions. Which quarterback was that? Once again, that's just 3 quarterbacks in 2020 had 450 plus passing yards in a single game last year. One of those 3 quarterbacks though was able to do this on 3 separate occasions. Which quarterback was that? Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Alright guys, without further ado, let's hop right into the video, and I am going to be giving you a high level overview, letting you know in general if we're either higher or lower than ADP. But considering there are so many players to go over, we won't have enough time to go super in depth with each one. Obviously, you can gain access to all of that with our draft package, and of course we are posting 11 videos per week, so these players are also included in those. And if you're wondering what ADP we're using, that's going to be pulling from the Underdog platform. We'll begin at the top of the draft with none other than Christian McCaffrey, the consensus running back 1, regardless of which platform you're drafting on. When it comes to the first running back off the board, there are a few names you could really throw into the hat. I'd add Dalvin Cook in there. You definitely could also consider Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara, maybe even Derrick Henry. But heading into 2021, if you have the first overall pick, I personally feel like the decision to take Christian McCaffrey is as easy as ever. For starters, over the past 2 seasons, dating back to 2018, he finished as the RB2. 2019, fast forward to then, C-Mac outdid himself even more, finishing as the RB1 with a massive 470 PPR points. Now, 470 points, that's completely massive. Those are numbers we typically see from the quarterback position, and Christian McCaffrey was producing that out of the running back position. And for those of you that aren't aware of exactly how much points 470 is, for reference, 470 fantasy points was more than any quarterback put up last season. Josh Allen, the quarterback to finish as the QB1 out of all quarterbacks, he actually came in with 397 fantasy points, so wasn't even able to crack 400 total. Alvin Kamara, the running back that finished as the RB1 in PPR leagues last season, didn't crack 400 PPR points as well, came in with 377 points, so nearly 100 less fantasy points than what Christian McCaffrey was able to do back in 2019, the last time we saw him healthy and on the field. Expecting Christian McCaffrey to repeat the type of production we saw in 2019 is an unrealistic expectation. The offense has many different weapons. To even have such a high ceiling season, so many things have to go in his favor, and expecting that to reoccur in 2021, it's an unrealistic expectation. But regardless, he has the strongest chance to finish as the top overall running back when compared to the other top 5 players. In addition, considering he does get most of his production in the receiving game, that is going to give him a safe week-to-week floor. But we already know on top of a safe floor, he has an extremely high ceiling, everything, the only thing possibly holding him back does have to be the quarterback position, with Sam Darnold now the QB out of Carolina. With how well Mike Davis played in the absence of Christian McCaffrey with Teddy Bridgewater under helm, poor quarterback play is no reason to be avoiding Christian McCaffrey or dropping him in the rankings. We suggest you take him first overall, but there are still some solid options right behind him. The only running back I could understand reasonably taking over Christian McCaffrey if you do have the first overall pick though would be the running back 2, Dalvin Cook. And Dalvin Cook's coming off of his most productive fantasy season on an offense that is trending upward. As we know, the Minnesota Vikings, led by Kirk Cousins, drafted Justin Jefferson last season, who was a complete stud, putting up over 1,400 receiving yards as a rookie. And with the Minnesota Vikings having a combination of Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, and Irv Smith leading this team from the receiver positions, you could make the argument that the Minnesota Vikings have the most weapons offensively than they've ever had, while Dalvin Cook is the lead back in this backfield. It's very likely that the offense operates even more efficiently than it did last season, and Dalvin Cook was definitely a player who took full advantage of how well the Vikings were able to move the ball up and down the field. Dalvin Cook posting career highs, not only in rush attempts, but also rushing yardage and rushing touchdowns. He did only appear in 14 games, and with Dalvin Cook, injuries are always going to be a concern, but he fully expects to play all 17 games this season, and as long as he's on the field, he's one of the players you can trust in your lineup, even if he's banged up. If Dalvin Cook suits up, you should always be starting him, and with the offense looking better than ever, you can make the argument that once again, Dalvin Cook is in line to post career highs, even over what he did last season. Jumping over to the third running back based upon Underdog's ADP, we went from Christian McCaffrey to Dalvin Cook to the third running back, which is Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. Now, with this third running back coming off the board, this is an area of the early first round where I do believe that people may be pivoting from Derrick Henry to possibly Alvin Kamara, maybe even Saquon Barkley. Us personally, we have no changes to what the ADP has versus what our rankings have. We agree with the consensus running back 1 being C-Mac, running back 2 being Dalvin Cook, and running back 3 being Derrick Henry. Even though I do feel strongly that both Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey should be taken ahead of Derrick Henry, if somebody is going into their draft and wanting to take Derrick Henry as the first running back overall, there's really not too much of a hard time I could really give them. While it is true Derrick Henry is not going to be the type of player to get a high amount of receptions, and with most leagues being some sort of half PPR or full PPR, that does of course impact your week-to-week volatility, but regardless, Derrick Henry is still a player who rushed for over 2,000 rushing yards last season, 2,027 to be specific. That was good to lead the entire NFL in rushing. He's definitely the favorite to do it once again this season, and unlike most running backs who get all of their work on the ground, the end result of that, we typically expect single-digit fantasy performances in bad games, and those aren't really very common when it comes to Derrick Henry. Last season in a PPR format, he only had 3 games where he posted single-digit fantasy points. That's no more risky than any other first-round running back, and when it comes to Derrick Henry, you also have to realize that while he did have 3 games where he posted single-digit fantasy points, he also had 4 games where he posted 30+. The offense for the Tennessee Titans should be better than ever. They added Julio Jones through a trade with the Atlanta Falcons. With the Titans pairing Julio Jones with A.J. Brown, this is easily the best wide receiving core they've ever had, while Derrick Henry's been the running back of this team. And with Ryan Tannehill also playing his best football, it's not out of the question for Derrick Henry to have his best fantasy season of his career. Now, one thing against him is, of course, he has received heavy volume. Whenever a running back does receive 300+ touches on the ground, it is alarming because the following season, we typically do see that take a toll on their body. Historically, when we have seen running backs to receive that type of massive workload, the following season, they are at a higher risk of injuring themselves. But when it comes to Derrick Henry, that's not a massive concern because he's now had 300+ touches in back-to-back seasons, and he's played in 15+ games in every season of his entire career. Moving into the RB4, the player we also have ranked as the running back for, we have Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. Kamara is, of course, coming off of a season where he did finish as the RB1, as I had mentioned earlier. That was on the back of 187 rush attempts, 932 rushing yards, 107 targets, a whopping 83 receptions for another 756 receiving yards, to go along with 21 total touchdowns. When it comes to Alvin Kamara, we already know in his wheelhouse he could always finish as the number 1 overall running back. Shouldn't be too surprising considering he just did it last season, but heading into 2021, there are some massive changes with this offense that we didn't see last season. For starters, the New Orleans Saints are moving away from Drew Brees, and I know he was injured last year, but heading into this season, they are going to be fully committing to a combination of Jameis Winston as well as Taysom Hill. With Drew Brees being injured for parts of last season, we did get a taste of what Alvin Kamara's production would look like without Drew Brees, and in the games where Taysom Hill was the starter, we did see Alvin Kamara take a bit of a hit when it came to his fantasy production. Don't get me wrong though, that's completely not a death sentence, and in fact, Jameis Winston may be the starter, and it's very possible that a pure pocket passer like Jameis Winston could prove more beneficial for Alvin Kamara, but at this point in the offseason, we are not sure exactly which quarterback will be starting or if it will be a combination of the two. It's undeniable though that the QB situation is going to increase the overall risk when drafting Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara himself, always a player to receive a lower volume total. We cannot forget, Kamara is still a running back yet to rush for 1,000 yards in a single season, but he's an extremely talented running back, one that you can rely on to have high efficiency, and in the red zone, he's a straight killer. So even though drafting him will present additional risk this season, that's not to say he's too risky to draft as the RB4. That's exactly where we have him ranked. Now, speaking of risk, the RB5, we have Saquon Barkley. If you ask us, Saquon Barkley is easily one of the riskiest running backs going in the early rounds. For that reason, we don't necessarily have Saquon Barkley listed as a target. He's not a player that we have listed as an avoid either. So if he falls to you, if he comes in at a good value, we're not telling you to go to the next player in the rankings. We're definitely fine with taking him at the RB5. But if I do draft Saquon Barkley in the first round, I try to make up for some of that risk by drafting appropriately in the following rounds. What I mean by that is targeting players at the running back position that may be a bit safer, maybe getting more depth pieces, so I know if Saquon Barkley does go down with an injury, I have enough players to know that I can replace him. But getting a bit more specific in the reasons why he's risky, it definitely comes down to the risk of re-injury as well as the offense that he's in. Saquon Barkley, unfortunately, after 2 games last season, suffered a season-ending injury. The year before that, he only appeared in 13 games, so to think after you draft him that you can just lock him in for 16 games and not draft a backup plan, that would be a foolish endeavor. Also, to play devil's advocate, after his rookie season, we saw in the following season, 2019, he regressed in many major categories. Areas like total rushing volume, total receiving volume, rushing efficiency, these are all areas he regressed in from his rookie season to his sophomore campaign. Year 3 was last season, and he wasn't performing any better, but a 2-game sample we really shouldn't hold against him, but it is worth noting that he did regress from his rookie season to his sophomore season, and the last time we saw him on the field, he wasn't much better. Regardless though, if we're looking at his sheer upside, he finished as the #1 overall running back as a rookie, and he's only 3 years removed from that situation. Looking at how he got his production though, it was heavily in the receiving game, 121 targets, 91 receptions. That's what we want out of our RB1s. Saquon Barkley, if all things go his way, definitely has RB1 in his wheelhouse, but if I'm guessing what's more likely, Saquon Barkley either finishing as the first overall running back or Saquon Barkley finishing outside the top 20, whether that be to injury or offense concerns, I would say Saquon Barkley probably has a more strong chance of busting than he does finishing as the first overall running back for fantasy football. Moving into the RB6, we have Ezekiel Elliott of the Dallas Cowboys. If you guys followed us throughout this offseason, you know I've been pretty high on Ezekiel Elliott this entire time. Now, with that being said though, I will say that we actually do have a discrepancy based on Ezekiel Elliott's ADP and where we have him ranked. We actually don't have him ranked as high as his ADP is on Underdog. While he is ranked as the RB6 there, we actually have him ranked as the RB7, flip-flop with the player behind him. But when it comes to Ezekiel Elliott, I definitely think he's not as risky as meets the eye. When it comes to Ezekiel Elliott and the lack of production he had in 2020, a lot of that can be put on the back of the injury that occurred to Dak Prescott after week 5. When it comes to running backs and their fantasy production, there are a lot of factors that go into having a successful or unsuccessful season. For starters, the health and success of the offensive line is very important to the success of the running back. On top of that, a strong receiving game is going to open up opportunities for the running back, and depending on how strong the team is, whether they have leads late in games often or if they're trailing from behind late in games or playing catch up, that's all going to have major impacts on how the running back is going to produce for your fantasy team. Last season, after Dak Prescott went down with an injury, the quarterbacks behind him were a complete mess. The best that they had was Andy Dalton, and while that did benefit the receivers because there was a ton of garbage time coming back from 2+ scores in many games last season, that did lead to a lot of passing volume for the receivers on this team, but unfortunately that was at the expense of the running backs in this offense, namely Ezekiel Elliott. With that said, I'm not going to be the person to sit here and hold that against him. With a healthy Dak Prescott and the most weapons that they've had at the wide receiver position since he's been the starter, there's a lot to look forward to and a lot to like when it comes to Ezekiel Elliott for 2021. It's very likely that the Dallas Cowboys are going to be competing for the league's best offense this season, and while the defense isn't much improved, having Dak Prescott on the team means that they're unlikely to be down 2-3 scores in the third and fourth quarter, something that was a pretty common sight to see in Dallas Cowboys games in 2020. Now, if an injury once again happens to Dak Prescott, that is going to have a major impact on Ezekiel Elliott's season-long fantasy value, but as it stands today, Dak Prescott is slated to be available for week 1, and as long as Dak Prescott is the starter in this offense, I'm completely fine with taking Ezekiel Elliott even as high as the RB6. We'd prefer to take him as the RB7 ourselves, that's where we have him ranked, but looking at the ADP, the RB7 based on Underdog is Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. Jonathan Taylor is coming off of a very successful rookie campaign in which he finished as the RB6 in PPR leagues, the RB4 in standard. That was on the back of him playing 15 games, getting 232 rush attempts on the ground, ran at a rate of 5 yards per carry, finished with 1,169 rushing yards, had 39 targets with an incredible catch rate, catching 36 of them for 299 receiving yards to go along with 12 total touchdowns. Now, the best part about Jonathan Taylor was that production was heavily weighted towards the second half of the season because to start the year, he wasn't given the full reins in this offense. By the end of the season, though, he was certainly getting a full workload. Look at week 17 against Jacksonville. He received 30 rush attempts on the ground. If that's not a full workload, I don't know what is. And although this offense has weapons in the receiving game like Nyheim Hines out of the backfield and Marlon Mack returning from injury, Jonathan Taylor did enough to prove to this offense and prove to the coaching staff that he has the chops in the receiving game to not be taken off the field in passing situations. On top of that, out of all the offenses we've went over so far, the Indianapolis Colts are probably the most well-rounded. They have a very strong defense. It's a very well-coached team, so the odds of them having late game leads is very likely, meaning Jonathan Taylor is likely to have some games where he's going to be rushing all up and down the field in the third and fourth quarter. So those 30 rush attempts we saw him post against the Jacksonville Jaguars in week 17 is definitely an occurrence we can expect to see once again for 2021, because there are going to be some games where they're going to run out the clock in the third and the fourth quarter, but those high ceiling games aren't the only reason to love Jonathan Taylor heading into 2021. The reason I say that is because last season they had Phillip Rivers as the starting quarterback of that team, and say what you want about Phillip Rivers and what he's done throughout his entire career, but the Phillip Rivers that the Indianapolis Colts received was not the Phillip Rivers that we had seen in those numerous years in San Diego as well as LA. Phillip Rivers, a quarterback known for boosting the production of the running back, being a position he heavily targets. And while that didn't change, sustained drives were just something Phillip Rivers wasn't consistently able to put together. Looking forward to 2021, though, there is some hope for some improvement. The Indianapolis Colts traded for Carson Wentz, and even though Carson Wentz himself, the last time we saw him on the field in Philadelphia, didn't really look like the MVP caliber Carson Wentz we had seen in 2018, 2019, one thing is for sure, he definitely has the potential and the upside to boost this offense significantly. But at worst, I would definitely consider it a lateral move, which opens up the door for even more upside for Jonathan Taylor that we may not have seen in 2020. Moving into the RB8, we have Cam Akers of the LA Rams. If you followed us throughout this offseason, you'll know exactly how high we are on this LA Rams offense. Matthew Stafford is now the quarterback, replacing Jared Goff, and when we're comparing arm talent from Jared Goff moving over to Matthew Stafford, the difference is night and day. We've always known that the LA Rams were loaded at the wide receiver position with Robert Woods as well as Cooper Kupp. Gerald Everett will serve as the tight end, so very similar to Dallas, where I had mentioned that they will be competing for one of the best offenses in the league. I definitely think the LA Rams are another team to throw in that hat. Now, Cam Akers is definitely a player that I do see falling in some drafts. I know Cam Akers isn't a household name and was only really a starter or a workhorse towards the second half of last season, and for most people, investing in a player for production we haven't yet seen is just something that they avoid doing altogether. That's not to say, though, that Cam Akers should be a player that you're avoiding. We're here to tell you to take advantage of any value gains you can possibly get from people avoiding him early in drafts. Cam Akers was a player who is receiving 20 plus touches in 4 of his final 6 games if you include the playoffs. Through that span, he also had a game where he had 29 rush attempts on the ground, 28 rush attempts on the ground, and when it comes to the competition for touches and targets behind him, there really isn't much besides Darrell Henderson. Now, Darrell Henderson is a very undersized back and definitely going to play the change of pace role. When both backs were healthy, they easily opted for Cam Akers, and the coaching staff has never looked back since. Heading into 2021, everyone's on the same page and fully aware that Cam Akers is the man, and whenever you get a running back on an offense that's going to be competing for top 5 as well as having a top 12 defense to go along with it, you're going to have very positive game scripts. So there's 28 rush attempts, the 29 rush attempts. Those are going to be common occurrences for Cam Akers owners. Moving into the RB9, we have Austin Ekeler of the LA Chargers. Now, Austin Ekeler was a bit banged up last season, but he did come back, so anybody that owned him and made it to the fantasy playoffs was definitely rewarded for having him on the roster. Despite only appearing in a mere 10 games, he still was able to finish as a top 25 running back. And as we all know, when it comes to Austin Ekeler, most of his production comes in the receiving game. In 2020, he received 116 rush attempts on the ground, converting that into 530 rushing yards. But in the receiving game, 65 targets, 54 receptions, an immaculate catch rate. He converted those 54 receptions to 403 receiving yards. And while that is pretty respectable, converting 54 receptions into 403 receiving yards, that was actually a career low for him. In the past 3 seasons prior to last season, Austin Ekeler, the superior running back in the receiving game, had been posting 10 plus yards per reception in every season as a pro. Heading into 2021, we can definitely expect some positive regression in that area, meaning he could possibly be even more efficient. And with this being Justin Herbert's second season in this offense, second season in the NFL, there is room for growth and potential for him to take a step forward. The most likely outcome is for him to remain similar or possibly take a step back just because he was so phenomenal. But throughout history, we have seen quarterbacks take their largest step in improvement from year 1 to year 2. So Justin Herbert, we definitely can't rule that out. On top of that, this offense lost Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry was a player who received 90 plus targets last season. So that's 90 vacated targets that are going to be spread across the offense. So for Austin Ekeler, a player that's one of the most heavily involved in the receiving game on this offense, that means he is likely going to get a trickle-down effect from Hunter Henry exiting in free agency. When it comes to the competition for targets, behind Austin Ekeler, there really isn't much to write home about. Joshua Kelly, Justin Jackson, none of these running backs in the absence of Austin Ekeler when he missed 6 games was really able to step up and separate themselves, meaning Austin Ekeler, as soon as he returns to this offense, is going to have a stranglehold as the lead back. So Austin Ekeler coming off the board as the RB9. While we do believe that's fair and he should post safe and consistent production throughout the season while healthy, we actually have him ranked a bit lower than that, and it's nothing against him, it's just because some of the other options at running back in this range we prefer over him. Moving over to the final running back in today's video, we have Nick Chubb of the Cleveland Browns. Now, Nick Chubb is coming off the board, as I had mentioned, as the RB10. We actually have him ranked a few spots lower at the RB13, but that's nothing against him or his efficiency, but it more is on the back of how this offense intends to use him. As we know, Kareem Hunt is the 1B to Nick Chubb's 1A. Nick Chubb is going to be the early down rusher, the goal line rusher, and Kareem Hunt will be mixed in as a change of pace back and the main running back to be targeted in the receiving game. Nick Chubb, while he was injured last season, only appearing in 12 of 16 games, he was very successful, still finishing as a top 12 running back in both standard and PPR, while even missing 4 total games last season. His success largely came on the back of efficiency, something he has been throughout his entire career, averaging 5 yards per carry in every season as a pro. But what's most alarming though is the lack of production in the receiving game. It's not to say he doesn't have a solid catch rate. He did get targeted 18 times last season, catching 16 of them. His yards per reception numbers are good. His yards per target numbers are also great, but that's unlikely to result in heavy receiving production as long as Kareem Hunt is on the roster. Kareem Hunt was a running back that finished as the RB10 last season in both standard and PPR. He was healthy though, playing a full 16 games, and although he didn't pop off as much as we had thought he would when Nick Chubb went down with an injury, we expected Kareem Hunt to have top 5 upside at the running back position. But regardless, Kareem Hunt is a player that's going to be involved in this offense whether Nick Chubb is healthy or not. He is going to end the season with more receptions, more targets than Nick Chubb, and in this day and age where receptions and targets are so valuable, that is going to impact Nick Chubb's week-to-week volatility as well as his ceiling and his floor. And even though Nick Chubb is a player we can rely on to run very efficiently at 5+ yards per carry, So long as Kareem Hunt is on the roster, that is going to have an adverse effect on Nick Chubb, and considering he's being taken in the top 10 running backs, we feel like that's a bit too hefty of a price to pay. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.